dissociative identity disorder, and regarding the validity of its diagnosis. I believe in extreme cases, definitely dissociative identity disorder can be a very real thing. If somebody's experienced extremely traumatic event, I believe, the mind is able to create this other persona as a defense mechanism to cope with this trauma in the best way they know how. And that's felt safe for them for the longest amount of time until it's grown into such an extreme that they take on a completely different, personality than the one they're used to. Often even, this other personality having a name and a whole even backstory, which shows how much they truly believe it is real. But to an extent, I think that there are certain cases where for sure, I think in the professor's lecture, Professor Algen's lecture, he cited Freud, explaining how people with emotional disturbances can maybe, fabricate some of these memories. And coming from my personal experience working in classrooms for teenagers with emotional disturbances, this is very real. Definitely has happened. I've seen kids make up traumatic events. Unfortunately, you try to give them the benefit of the doubt, but the reality is some of them will manipulate situations to try and make it seem like they don't have responsibility for something due to their emotional disturbance. And another good valid point I think that was mentioned in the lecture is that, post-traumatic stress disorder, the key component of that diagnosis is that the patient, the memory, the traumatic event is so intrusive into their daily life that they, it causes them to break down and just can't even perform remedial daily tasks. So I believe that's a really key component to think of too with some of the people with dissociative identity disorder who seem to have the false memory recollection where they can't remember this traumatic event, which to an extent again could make sense. A patient could really just want to block that out completely, that they just do not want to go to that part of their brain to even think about it, to even think about what happened. So again, I believe it is a true disorder, true diagnosis, but it's not as prevalent as we think, as people once thought in the 1960s and 70s, which seemed to have sensationalized the disorder through the media and through a lot of film. Many films came out during that time depicting people with dissociative identity disorder or multiple personality disorder, as it was known at the time. And I believe the sensationalism through the media is what created, people believing they have this diagnosis, maybe identifying with the character in the movie. And with a lot of people seeking out this diagnosis, unfortunately, it seemed like there was a lot of doctors that wanted to exploit this diagnosis for a quick cash grab, and I think that can be definitely related to the overdiagnosis of ADHD within children that happened within the early 2000s and 2010s when I was in junior high and high school. Definitely saw a large amount of my classmates being diagnosed with ADHD and end up developing substance abuse disorders associated with the medication that they were given. And then if they were never exposed to this medication, I firmly believe they wouldn't have become addicted to harmful illicit substances. Yeah, overall, I think that if a patient does come in with dissociative identity disorder or seeking treatment for it, the concern should be taken seriously. But at the same time, must the therapist who is overseeing this patient must really, be careful when looking for the diagnosis and make sure all the other warning sign triggers don't check out. And it sounds like with the lesser diagnosis in recent years, that therapists are doing a better job with that. And that's my take on this subject.